This is the Bungle Bungles range of mountains. They're described as sort of beehive dome type mountains in the Purnululu National Park in northwest Australia. And this is a photograph kindly shared with me by a Patreon member, Meg. And Meg actually had to, this is a very remote part of Australia. I think you can only get there with a 4x4 vehicle, or probably a tank, or a helicopter. I think Meg actually went there by helicopter. So what a beautiful place, very remote. This mountain range, it's well over 350 million years old, and it's basically layers of different substances: sandstone, rocks, conglomerate, gravel, creating these different layers here, and these subtle, different, lovely warm colours that are so typical of Australia, and this light bluey green foliage of the scrubland as well. So from a watercolour point of view, nice bands of lights and darks, nice bands of cools and warms, that cool blue of the sky, the warmth of those, the Bungle Bungles, these beehive dome shapes, then back to the cool of the middle ground there as we come down, cooler, lighter with these rocks around the pool, and then we're back to a more intense blue on the reflection in this pool. I thought it quite unusual to see a pool like that in that part of Australia, whether they get a bit of rainfall or whether this is a creek, I'm not so sure. But a lovely scene to use a number of different watercolor techniques. So certainly I'm going to be using wet in wet here. I'm going to be using some dry brush marks for creating these horizontal layers of the rock there. So in this video, I'm going to, as I'm doing right now, I'm describing the source photo, what attracted me to the scene, how am I going to approach it, my composition. There's no figures here, there's no cars here, this is pure nature, apart from maybe these white posts, I'm sure. They're not 350 million years old. So pure nature. And in this video, I'm going to go through the complete painting process with you, with starting off with the initial drawing, getting in the main shapes of the mountains there. I'm going to pre-wet the paper this time. I don't often do that on videos, but I'm going to pre-wet the paper to get a nice soft edge. So plenty of wet in wet, getting soft edges. So you'll see me do my initial wash, laying down the foundation of the base colours in the key areas of the painting: the sky, the mountains, the foliage in the middle, the rocks around the edge of the pool, and then the actual pool itself. Then I'll be applying my darks, trying to add a bit more depth. How do you get depth into this? We don't want to make it two-dimensional, we want to make it three-dimensional. So we don't want to apply too much detail to those rocks behind, but we still want to pay homage to the lovely structure of those rocks. And then the foliage. How do we paint trees? How do we make them realistic? These trees here, they're in places, they're almost transparent, like that one there. You can just sense in a few places we can see the rocks beyond, and these ones on the right-hand side. You can't necessarily see, too much foliage. You're almost beginning to see the rocks behind. How do we do these grasses in the foreground? How do we get the soft reflections in that pool there? How do we create realistic rocks as well? So I'll be doing that with my more detailed work and adding in values in there as well. And then towards the end, or at the end, I'll give a little bit of a self-critique session. So there we are. the Bungle Bungles in Purnululu National Park. Let's see how we get on. The paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is cold press paper, 300 grams, and it's 15 inches across by 11 inches down. What's that in centimetres? About 35 centimetres by 27 centimetres, something like that. And I'm starting with the mountains, the Beehive dome-shaped mountains. That's a critical part, and drawing them about a third. This band of mountains about a third of the way down, so just a thin slither of sky to deal with, and concentrating on getting right these dome shapes, all different sizes, and some behind the others, some in the background there, and then over to the right hand side. I'm using a 3B pencil here, probably just pressing the paper a little bit harder than I would normally, just so that it does show up a bit more on camera. And then just at the base of these hills is some scrubland, different layers of trees and grasses coming towards the foreground, and a little pool that's going to give us the reflections. That's the far side of the pool. Then the near side of the pool here. A nice sort of filling of that bottom left corner. And then just an outline of the reflections. Actually quite a simple drawing. Just the background, getting right those dome shapes, and then the middle ground, just a few little trees here I'm drawing in. I'll leave it up to the painting stage to just finally decide where those trees go, and if the watercolor painting, me painting it, it just gives me some extra trees and foliage in there, I'll do that. Let's make a little bit of a darker line there so you can see what I'm doing, and I'll be able to see also when I come to the painting stage where that's going to be. I'm not actually drawing in the horizontal layers of the rocks. I'll leave that to the painting stage. So anyone that's not a member of the My Little Patreon Club, if you want to have a go at projects like this, pop up to patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. You'll see full details there of different levels of involvement and participating in projects like this. So this is the third Australian scene. I've done previously, what I did the other week, the Sydney Opera House, and then we've done, as a Patreon project, we've done, those of you on Patreon, you remember we did the Flynn's Beach, Port Macquarie in New South Wales, and I'm doing my sort of virtual trip around the world. It'll be Southeast Asia next. Right, I've got my water, and I'm going to pre-wet the paper so I can get some soft edges in here. clear water. I'm actually doing that a little bit more now, pre-wetting the paper to get these soft edges. I know some people who would always wet their paper. Some people I know wet both sides of the paper. They would do the drawing, then dip the whole paper in water, and then just put it on the board and not even, well, maybe just clip it down. I'm just pre-wetting one side of the paper here. And starting from the top with a soft brush, it could be any sort of brush. I could have used a flat brush. I've used a sponge before, a soft sponge. But this is my Raphael Soft Aqua brush, synthetic mop brush. So I've pre-wetted the top third there over the tops of the outline of the mountains, and now trying to mix in a fairly intense blue. In the photograph, I'm not sure with photographs whether they are maybe with a little bit of filtering. Sometimes you get them being quite intense. So I'm not going to have it as blue as that. But starting from the top, fairly thick, because the paper is so moist, it's giving me a fairly even application of that paint. Just strengthen it up a bit more on the top, so it's stronger blue at the top, coming a little bit weaker down to the horizon, and then over the tops of over the outline of the mountains there. Now the base colour of the Bungles range itself, that lovely rich red colour. Of course, we've got different materials in these mountains, these different layers of sand and conglomerate and gravel and so on. And I believe they do change their colour as well. In the rain, they oxidize, or some chemical reaction happens, and I think they go darker, maybe in colour. The darker the grey goes black or something. So quite striking. So this is just the base colour. Just picking up some warms here, and looking at the photograph, I can see oranges and purples as a base colour, light red as a colour. I'm trying to vary it as I'm going from left to right here. A little bit more orange there. Let me describe my colours to you, my palette of colours to you. No difference from previous paintings, but starting from the top, I've got neutral tint, then burnt umber, then burnt sienna, yellow ochre, fourth one down, then viridian green, cobalt green, then cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, I'm using those three quite a lot here, and lemon yellow. Right down the bottom I've also got a lavender there. So on the left hand side there's a little bit of foliage coming in that's in the middle ground, that's sort of in front of the mountains. It's hiding, it's covering the mountains behind. So I'm just now starting to put in this layer of foliage. With the mountains, I came down quite dry at the base, and I'm now adding in these rows of foliage, which will be different greens, using the cobalt green here, a light bluey green, and almost stabbing the paper with my brush, doing that wetting wet, going in with that foliage colour into the background mountains, and getting that soft edge. And then just leave it. Just let the watercolour do what it's going to do. Doesn't matter if my brush there gets splayed, it can give me some nice foliage shapes. Now I've mixed in a bit more water here. I've gone a lot more watery and apply this layer of, to me it looks like either very small shrubs or some tall grass. Maybe it's sort of a very light green shrub. So I'm not up on the flowers and the fauna and foliage of this area, but I'm just looking at these different shades of green, cool greens, warmer greens, light greens, dark greens, just trying to alternate these bands as I'm coming towards me. So if I want to go a little bit more intense, just have a little bit more paint to water ratio. If I want a more vibrant green, pick up a little bit of yellow there. If I want to go a little bit warmer, pick up a bit of red. Just coming on further on down towards the edge of the pool and that lovely rock that's catching the bright light. So just at on the outside of the rock area, there's this very intense green. So I'm mixing a sort of 50-50 mix here of a blue and a yellow. In this case, it's lemon yellow and ultramarine blue, just to get that more vibrant green colour. I've just changed to a smaller brush here. This is a mop brush. Could use a medium-sized synthetic brush just to, again, stab in, drop in little bits of different shades of green into that background. It's going to go softer, it's going to go lighter as it dries, so it might look a little bit of a mess now, perhaps a bit too dark in places, but it will go a lot lighter. At the base of this bright green colour, that's this bright green grass that's closest to us, there's some darker areas in it, so I've just picked up a little bit of blue and drop that into that edge just to make it a little bit darker, to give us some soft shadows there. If you look at the source photo, there are some softer, darker, shadowy areas in there. The colour for these rocks, I can see all sorts of colours in there. Blues, browns, creamy colours. So that's what I need to do when I'm painting in these rocks, is try and think about those different variations of colours in there. Doesn't matter if I get a little bit of bleeding in from that grass. That can be tidied up with a smaller brush later on. Now, I do need to think about, as I was just mentioning, watercolor painting. Invariably painting, when you're painting with it, it's going to dry. It's going to dry lighter than you're applying it. So I've got to compensate by going in just a little bit darker there. And on the left-hand side, gently around the base of the that bright green grass there, doesn't matter if it just bleeds a little bit into the rocks. Bit cooler on that bottom edge where there's some soft shadows coming in. I'll darken that up later on, but that's just a bit of a base shadow in there. Then the next part is this lovely blue pool, and the sky is, the blue is going to be darker than the sky blue. So whatever colour you have done in the sky, go a bit darker for the reflection. And I'm going to leave a little bit, I detect in the photograph a little bit of a light edge around the pool, just where it connects, almost connects with the rocks, the smooth rocks. So I'll leave in places just a little bit of a white edge there. I don't need to go right up to the top of the pool because that's where the soft reflections are going to come in. Which I'm mixing up now. So another bit of wet in wet to get the soft edge of those reflections. It's a bit difficult to decide what the colours are in the photograph. To me, it looks like the actual reflections are quite green, whereas of course the Bungle Bungles, they're that bright red sort of purplish colour, but in the photograph it's quite green. So I'm just going with the photograph and dropping in this colour now, thicker colour, thicker than the water. Okay, so it's going to get that soft edge, but it's not going to bleed or create any blooms or cauliflowers, and vary the edge of this, the bottom edge of this reflection. Keep mixing up this quite intense, thick green colour. So there's actually quite a lot of water in this mixture. It's mostly paint, and going along the edge of the reflections, and then I'll fill in above that to go up to the edge of the rocks. Just drop in a bit of extra colours and going along. I'm just covering over that blue. And it does go darker up towards the edge of the rocks. The reflection does go a bit darker. And I'm leaving that little white edge around the pool. Come over to right, just drop in bits of colour here and there. Just observing the reflection, you can see subtle, dark, softer dark areas in there. It's not all one shade of green. It's definitely darker at the top of the reflection, then quite a light green towards the bottom, and then that soft edge. Now that white, that slither of white I've got there, is going to be filled in with a darker reflection of the rocks above. So I'm using a bit of lavender, a bit of alizarin crimson, so this is the rock reflections here. Soft edge at the where the rock reflection joins the green, if I call it the green reflection, there's a soft edge there as well, so a bit more of a wetting wet technique going on there. And over to the side. And now finally in the bottom left corner, the base colour of the rocks here. I don't want to be too detailed down here in the bottom left corner. I want to keep it nice and simple. There's some very thin wispy grasses growing up from, I guess, from little crevices in the rocks here, and that will connect very nicely in the photograph, or hopefully my painting, connect very nicely between the near side of the pool and the far side of the pool. Just connect those two elements together. I think it's quite nice, and also a little bit of a vertical interest, apart from all these horizontals that are going on, the horizontals of the Bungle Bungles and the horizontals of the foliage in the middle ground, and then the rocks. We need a few verticals to connect those different horizontal areas together. Now just at the edge of this near side, a little bit of a darker trim, there's darker edge to that. And with this soft brush it does help giving these soft edges as well. Bit more shadow on the left hand side. This is probably coming from the overhanging tree, which I haven't drawn in. That will come in later on at the end of the painting, but thinking about the shadow of that tree that I'm imagining is in the top left corner of the shot. Dark, even darker there, just at the edge of the pool. I guess there's a little overhang there or something that's creating some more intense shadow. Brush I'm using now is a small synthetic brush. It's a company called Jack's Hair, I think they are, size 5, but any small synthetic brush can do. And let's start getting in these horizontals of the mountains. Now, look, again, it's down to observation. These bands, they're not all uniform in thickness. There's different distances between these horizontal bands, so I don't want to be too regular in these. Just introduce a few little random gaps with these horizontals, and the light is coming from the left, so I will also need to be a bit darker on the right hand side of these domes. As I'm coming down towards the tree line at the base of these mountains. Just doing a bit of negative painting there, painting around the shapes of the trees. Now onto this next dome. Some of these brush strokes, they're almost dry brush strokes, not too much water at all, and I'm just, with the texture of the paper, I am just beginning to get a nice sort of dry brush mark, so it's giving me the sort of speckled appearance of some of these horizontal bands of the sandstone and the gravel and conglomerate layers. Now this one here is just leaning a little bit slightly top left to bottom right. Not, to me it doesn't look as if it's totally horizontal, these bands, so I'll just introduce a little bit of an angle there. This brush also, it's got a flat edge to it now because I've just squeezed out all the water, and that just helps me with creating those bands, just the right sort of thickness that I want for that. There's a dark edge. There's quite a dark edge on that middle dome on the right, which is creating a nice bit of contrast with the larger one on the right. You notice as the trees are drying, it's created some nice watercolor effects, which I think they look quite nice from a point of view of creating the impression of trees and the canopy of trees. Those on the right hand side, where the paint has dried and you've got that darker edge to them. I can actually I can emphasize that a little bit more as I'm doing here, just by doing a bit of negative painting around some of these trees and the base of the mountains. Use my fingertips just to partially lift out things or blend things as well. This smaller dome in the middle, it's actually a little bit lighter. I don't think doesn't have those warm reds of the ones, well, certainly on the right hand side behind it. So that one's a bit cooler, a bit lighter. So this bigger dome on the right hand side, it is warmer. That's why I put in that cad orange base color in there. I don't want to cover it up too much. There's a little bit of darkness at the very top of the dome on the right hand side, and as I come down to the canopy of trees, just paint these bands up to the edges of those trees and then up to one side and then continue on the other side, and these tree shapes will manifest themselves a little bit more. Then this, I guess what I'm painting here is really a continuation as the right hand side of this larger dome. These bands, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to know when to stop. The more you look at the photograph, the more details. I guess it's a bit like a building. The more details you see, so the trick I think is to keep things fresh and loose, is to know when to stop. I'm nowhere near finished yet, but I'm just thinking to myself, the more detail I put in there, the problem is that will be, it might begin to look a little bit too overworked and bring the whole thing further forwards, whereas in reality they're probably several hundred meters in the distance. These domes, I think these mountains are about 200 to 300 meters tall, so you can't really feel, I guess, too much the size of these domes, unless I was to put in a few people. I'm not going to have any people in this painting. This is going to be figureless, no people, obviously no cars. The foliage here, this middle band, is still a little bit damp, and with my brush now, I'm just dropping in bits of darker shadows I'm looking at where the watercolor has dried. My previous application has dried, and it's created little circular, little oval shapes which can be emphasized a little bit more to create trees. And with this smaller brush, just dropping in little bits of shadow to emphasize that, thinking about again the light coming from the left, so the shadows are going to be on the right, and create the form there of these different bands of foliage. Coming further forwards, a bit more shadow underneath these grasses where they're meeting the smooth rock. And you can see the way I do it is just with these marks going all over the place, and just the brush is now getting quite dry, not all the paint, just replenish it, keep going along, not too much water, dry brush marks. The paper, the paint below is still a little bit damp, nearly drying, still a little bit damp, so I can get a few extra soft edges out of it. And then over on the right hand side here, just above this bigger area of rock, we've got more erratic marks. I've got to put in some horizontal marks of the rock as well, just to make it look a little bit more realistic as a smooth rock here. So quite interesting little indentation there where that darkness is created. I think it's quite a nice bit of area of interest for it, rather than just having a plain. I think the photograph is brilliant from that point of view. Just exposing that little indentation, a bit of a dark there, kind of lighter area above. bit more shadow on the left. It's not in the photograph, but when I went quite light there on the left, it almost looks like there's a bit of mist coming in, a bit of, or maybe a bit of dust being disturbed from the surface, or a bit of wind coming in. So I think it's quite a nice effect that I accidentally got there, completely by fluke. So I'm just playing now with this brush and just looking at the marks the first wash has made, creating trees here. Do you see there? Just that little one there. I can detect the canopy of a small or medium-sized tree. And then these here, I'll just add in a bit more shadow, dry brush marks, just underneath them, and just to the right-hand side. And these nearby rocks, they're just a bit of shadow on the right-hand edge. Again, thinking of the sun coming from the left and just picking up little bits of rock and making them brighter. I need to now make the trees on the left stronger in that middle ground. Brush I'm using now is quite an old ox hair brush that I picked up for about 50p, and it's lost loads of hairs. When I started using it, first of all, it lost so many hairs I almost threw it out. But now it's just the right number of hairs or the right thickness to create some sort of wacky tree canopy foliage shapes. You can see that with the brush splaying out the hairs, and here we are, just picking up anything in the palette and dragging it from the center of the canopy out to the outside of the canopy. We can create the effect of these trees here, and the base of those trees quite dark. I think that's probably actually one of the darker parts of the whole painting, is that dark right-hand corner of those that group of trees there. And I'll need to think, going back to verticals, need to think of a few tree trunks, of course, but you can just, in the photograph, these tree trunks, they're quite thin, they're quite narrow. Almost makes you think, well, how are they able to support the tree above? But I guess they're not very dense trees. The foliage is quite sparse and the leaves are quite small, so I guess it's not too dense a shape. So yeah, just picking up on some of these very faint little verticals. I could have used a rigger brush for this, or the point of my mop brush, but this brush will do. And it's great for doing foliage, grass, shrubs, trees. So I'm particularly these natural brushes, old natural brushes, I'm a bit reluctant to throw them out just in case I can use them, like this one, use them for some other purpose, for giving these pleasing, to me, they look quite pleasing. They're compensating for my lack of painting skills on drawing trees, and they're helping me create those quite nice tree shapes and the texture of foliage. I'm just going to speed up the drawing process shortly, just touching the surface there and making sure, or just trying to find out how dry that might be, and use the hairdryer here to speed up the drying process, because I need those domes to be lovely and dry before I just go in and emphasize some darker bands, again with some dry brush marks. Make them a little bit darker, introduce a bit more shadow on the right hand side of those domes, and also I'm going to be using a little bit of white paint, which I do use sparingly, but I in the photograph you can just detect some very light rock, almost like I would think of it in the UK as like chalk or something like that, but it's a lovely contrast with the darker bands and the reds. So you've almost got reds, greys, red bands, grey bands, purple bands, and then just a few little specks of white here and there, and a few on the tops. But first of all, let's just get these darker bands just right, going up to the edge of that tree again. Pick up over on the right hand side. And around another little tree there at the base. I picked up a little bit of lavender there. I'm using a bigger brush now, back to my medium-sized squirrel mop brush, to get in some darker shadows. Not much water, bit of neutral tint, keep mixing until I think is right. Check the edge of my brush, and then from the right, going left, which is, for me being right-handed, I'd rather paint left to right, but this needs, I think here, I need to paint right to left. Just drag these dry brush marks over to the left, and with those darker areas creating some contrast with the lighter left side, the lighter left side of the dome next to it. And that's just going to create a little bit more form and shape and depth to these domes, trying to make them not look too two-dimensional, more three-dimensional, and this receding range of domes. There's a few there, just we can just sneak it and see some through the canopy of trees on the left-hand side, just a few there. I'll call this the middle dome. So the middle dome is quite dark on this bottom right corner. That creates a bit of contrast with a smaller one, that cooler, lighter one I mentioned at the over to the right of it. Alizarin crimson, right to left, gently create these marks. I always think of, would I do this slightly differently, this technique that I'm using here? Would I, if I did this another time, like this is the first time I've painted this location, would I do it differently? Maybe I might have gone not so soft on the edge of the tops of the domes. I'm not sure if a more intense blue would be a little bit better. It's gone quite light there. I like the blue in the pool. I think that's about right. But maybe could have gone a tiny bit more intense with the blue in the sky. I don't know. Pretty sure this part of Australia is going to have some very intense skies, some beautiful skies. I think as a painter, if you were based here, if it was possible to be based here as a painter, you'd have so many different painting subjects. The landscape, the foliage here, these mountains, there's gorges there, chasms, caves. It sounds like it's a fantastic place to be. Right, a bit darker. Along that left-hand rocky area. Small brush again. Just starting to hopefully feel that this green area is foliage and it's not anything else. It does look like bushes and scrub and grasses. To me, it looks like there's a little footpath from this pool that I guess would lead you up to the base of the domes. I can see some little white posts, which I'll use a little bit of white paint for those posts. And that will be the only evidence of mankind on this scene. Apart from those white posts, this is probably what it's looked like for millions of years. Unbelievable. As well as Patreon, my Patreon club, I've also got regular online workshops on normally a monthly basis. Just go up to crowdcast.io Tim Wilmot, and you'll see full details of the next workshop coming up, and also the ability to still take part in previous workshops there. Normally $7, only $7, price of a cup of coffee, and you get a critique as well. So take a look at those. Right, now for these lighter bands of the Bungle domes. A little bit of paint, not pure white, and very sparingly just add in a few horizontal marks, not too much. You can only really see these white marks when you look at the source photo for some time, or you zoom in, you just sort of detect these little whiter bands. So I don't want to overdo it, just a few here and there, not too regular, pretty random. Again, just observing the edges of those trees going up to the edge of the tree, and then maybe over on the right hand side of that tree. Bit of white on the top of that one. And there's the slight angle, I think, on that that previous one. Bit of white on the top. Down towards the middle, up to the edge of the trees, over to the right-hand side of the trees, and then finally on the right-hand side. And having a brush like this, it does give you accidental blobs of white, and it's not too precise. Gives you those sort of random, like there, just is quite bright on that left-hand side, and then another little blob there in the middle. A couple of brighter lines there. There's these posts, these, as I say, the only evidence of mankind being here, a couple of, or three vertical posts. I'm using a rigger brush here from Lebenson. This is a synthetic rigger brush with a bamboo handle. It's great for doing thin, very thin lines, almost the thickness of a hair. And I think that's great. Mixed in a little bit of yellow with a little bit of white gouache for, and not too much water, for creating these little wispy grasses, which as I said earlier, is connecting the near side to the far side of the pool, just in a few areas to connect these different elements together. This brush is great for doing power lines on street scenes, or ropes on harbour scenes for boats, rigging, that sort of thing for yachts. Full details of this Lebenson brush is in the description of this video. Again, not overdo it. I think that's enough. Now this is a dagger brush, a sword brush, to get in the tree in the top left corner. Another great brush for doing foliage and branches. It's actually quite good for doing grass as well. It's not as thin as the rigger brush I used just previously, but this one, and I'm just accidentally, you can't actually see the way I'm holding it and where the camera is. You can't actually see too much of the way I'm using this brush, but it does hold quite a lot of paint, so I find you've got to fill it up quite a lot, not too much, so that when you touch the paper it just all kind of just comes out of the brush, all the water just splodges all over your paper. But just a bit of practice getting it just right, medium amount of paint in there, and then creates these nice twigs and branches and foliage. Just again stabbing the paper just with the tip of the brush gives a nice foliage shape. And this is quite dark. This is quite dark here on that left hand side. Nice bit of contrast with the lighter trees in the middle ground. Back to my rigger brush, pick up on a few highlights on the left hand side of some of those trees. Just a few, not all of them. And I can't resist the temptation to go back into the Bungle Bungles again and do with this brush, with this rigger brush. Just introduce a few thinner horizontal lines, just a few. There we go. I think that's enough with the white. I just need to add in just a few more darks with a smaller brush. Go back to my smaller synthetic brush and pick up a bit of cobalt, some cooler shadows in there just underneath the middle ground trees, bit of neutral tint, make some of the horizontals on the domes just a little bit stronger, particularly on the right hand side. There we go. Ultramarine blue, neutral tint, not too much water. At this stage, I often find I do this towards the end of a painting, particularly with this brush. I can't resist the temptation to just go around the painting and almost like dancing around and just adding in little dots and dashes in different places. There we are, just a few dots in there. Probably doesn't need it, but I just can't resist it. Then connect that little bit of foliage on the right hand side with that dome, stronger on the right hand side here, up to the edge of the middle dome. As I always do, a little bit of a self-critique session at the end of the painting. Did it go well? Did it go bad? So on the whole, I'm quite pleased with it. I could have gone maybe a little bit more intense with the sky colour. So this is the Bungle range in the Purnululu National Park in the Kimberley area, northwest Australia. These beautiful beehive dome-shaped, which got different horizontal layers there. So let me just zoom in a little bit more. So we got that soft edge of the tops of the domes, and then these horizontal lines. A lot of that was done with a smaller brush, dry brush marks, a little bit of white paint towards the end, and then coming down into the middle ground. Let's zoom in. Just letting what watercolor does what it wants to do. So that mark there, for example, this mark here, when I was stabbing the paper with my brush and it just made these marks, do you see they sort of almost look like trees. You're just letting watercolor do that sort of thing, and then strengthening it up a little bit more, strengthen up with a smaller brush, these darker shadow areas here, that there, where you see, or where I saw these round marks appearing. Well, here, let's just zoom in there. So here, that shape there, instantly it's a tree. That shape there, instantly it's a tree. And then some more darker, intenser trees on the left-hand side. A little bit of the dome showing through. A little gap in the canopy, darker shadows, this scrubland coming up towards the edge of this cool pool, and more wet in wet with the edge of those reflections, dropping that in thicker colour, like I did with the mountains. Started off with the sky, came down over the tops of the mountains, and then with thicker paint, less water to pigment ratio than the sky, so it doesn't sort of bleed too much up that way, and the board is on a slight slope anyway, so that does help a little bit. And it does help having good quality watercolor paper as well. Then the paint doesn't travel too much, and you get these, that nice sort of wavy soft edge there, and that darker, quite like that in the photograph as well. That darker area in that little recess. And to finish it off, the use of the rigger brush to do these grass shapes here, which was a little bit of yellow and white gouache, And the dagger brush, or the sword brush, not sure what most people call it, but a great brush for doing that foliage in the top left corner. If you haven't got a dagger brush or a sword brush, you must get one. It's invaluable if you're doing foliage, and particularly trees that where the canopy is not too dense and there's lots of leaves, thin branches, and not so, it's quite sparse foliage. There you are then, Bungle Bungles. Hope you like it. Catch up with you on the next video.